You ever look at the world and just wonder, why do some wealthy, democratic countries seem to have it all together, while others with basically the same resources are just trapped in this endless cycle of political chaos? It's a huge puzzle in modern politics, and today we're going to unpack a really fascinating new way to understand what's going on.
So here's the plan. We'll kick things off with a real-world puzzle, then dive deep into the hidden forces that are really pulling the strings. I'm going to introduce you to a brand new way to measure all this, called the Political Sustainability Index, or PSI. We'll put it to the test, see if it actually works, and then we'll use it to solve our puzzle and figure out what all this means for the future of government.
All right, so let's jump right into that puzzle. Because when you really look at it, it uncovers this incredible mystery about why some countries are just so much more resilient than others.
And look, this isn't just some abstract academic question. The answer to this really determines whether a country can actually tackle the big stuff, huge challenges like economic crises or climate change. So how can two countries that look so similar on the surface get such totally different results?
Let's use climate policy as a perfect example. In the United States, it feels like constant whiplash, right? One president signs a major international deal, and the very next one comes in and tears it up. The policy just swings back and forth again and again. But then you look over at a country like Germany. Their long-term climate goals have been incredibly stable, surviving through totally different ruling parties and shifting coalitions. Just calling both of them democracies really doesn't help us understand this huge difference in their ability to get things done.
Well, it turns out the answer isn't in the usual political metrics we look at. It's actually hidden in this constant, invisible battle between two really powerful, competing forces. The first force is something called partisan capture power, or PCP. You can think of it like malware for a political system. Any group could be a corporate lobby, a political faction, any special interest that's trying to hack the system to get what it wants right now, even if doing that really hurts the country in the long run. This is where corruption and instability come from.
And fighting against that malware is the second force, systemic integrity capacity, or SIC. If PCP is the virus, SIC is the system's antivirus software, its firewall, its immune system, all rolled into one. It's the built-in, constitutional strength of a state to fight off that capture, to make sure the rules are applied fairly to everyone, and to make smart, long-term decisions.
So this is the fundamental tug-of-war, the heart of how a country is run. PCP is all about me now, and that leads straight to corruption and chaos. SIC, on the other hand, is about us for the long haul, and that's what builds resilience and stability. A country's fate really just boils down to which one of these forces wins out.
Okay, so this theory is cool, but it leads to something that's honestly groundbreaking. A way we can actually measure a country's political immune system.
It's called the Political Sustainability Index, or PSI. And I want to be clear, this is not just another ranking of how democratic a country is. You should think of it as a totally new kind of diagnostic tool. It's designed to measure the quality of a country's constitutional hardware, its actual ability to govern fairly for the long term.
So how does it work? Well, the PSI looks at this capacity across three really important areas. First up is electoral input, basically how fair and open is the process for citizens to actually have their voices heard. Then, the biggest piece of the pie is executive processing. How good is the government's core engine at resisting capture and balancing power? And finally, there's territorial output. How well does the system work at all levels, from local to national and even international?
Okay, it's a fascinating theory for sure, but here's the billion-dollar question. Does a high PSI score actually matter in the real world? Does this political immune system really do anything?
The answer is a huge, emphatic yes. Just let that number sink in for a second. 84%.
So what does that mean? It means research shows that countries with high PSI scores, the ones with that strong systemic integrity, are 84% less likely to spiral into civil conflict after getting hit with a massive shock, like a financial crisis. Their strong institutional design acts like a shock absorber, letting them handle blows that would absolutely shatter more fragile states.
And that's not all. The PSI is also an amazing predictor of good government. It's a pretty clear trend. As a country's PSI score goes up, its level of corruption goes way down. And that makes total sense, right? A system that's literally designed to resist capture and enforce rules fairly is, by its very nature, a system where corruption has a much harder time taking root.
So now, let's go all the way back to our original mystery.
Because now that we have the PSI, we can use it as a diagnostic tool to see exactly why the US and Germany get such different results on something like climate policy.
And here it is. This is basically the smoking gun. This chart lays out the specific institutional fault lines. First, look at financial equity. The US gets a 0, mostly because private money has such a huge role in politics, which just opens the door for capture. Germany, perfect score, thanks to public funding. Then there's the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. The US system gives the executive a ton of power, which is what leads to that policy whiplash. But Germany's system forces coalition building, which creates stability. And finally, supranational integration. The US has no outside body to lock in its promises. Germany, on the other hand, is bound by EU law, a really powerful extra layer of systemic integrity.
What this all shows is that the PSI isn't just pointing out a correlation. It is pinpointing the specific design features, the actual wiring of the state, that explain why one country is vulnerable to capture and chaos, while another one is built for resilience.
So, what does this all mean for the future of politics? This is where the whole idea gets really provocative. It starts to challenge some of our most basic ideas about what political progress even looks like.
The research behind all this proposes a new term for a state with high systemic integrity, an ecocracy. Now, don't get hung up on the eco part. It's not about being green in the environmental sense. It comes from the Greek word oikos, which means household. So an ecocracy is a state whose constitutional hardware is built to manage the entire household, the whole system, fairly and sustainably for the long haul.
And this is a direct challenge to that famous end of history idea, the theory that liberal democracy is the final, ultimate form of government. This new theory suggests the big political project for the 21st century has totally changed. It's not just about spreading democracy anymore, it's about upgrading our political systems so they can achieve high systemic integrity.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty powerful question to chew on. In this era of incredibly complex, global challenges that demand we think long-term, is the struggle to build nations with high systemic integrity, to build states that can resist short-term greed in favor of long-term survival, is that now the most important political project of our time?